Hi, boys and girls. Here we are again, and we are going to read chapter 9 from Owls in the Family. So I'm going to have Weeps join me today. He's feeling a little left out because Wool got all the action in chapter 8. So Weeps is he's a little bit sad, so he's going to hang out with us today. Wool and Weeps were with us long enough to be well known in Saskatoon, particularly Wool. As my father said, Will never quite realized he was an owl. Most of the time he seemed to think he was people. At any rate, he liked being with people, and he wanted to be with us so much that we finally had to stop trying to keep him out of the house. If we locked him out, he would come and bang his beak against the window pane so hard we were afraid the glass would break. Oh no! Bam! 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 Screens were no good either, because he would either tear them open with one sweep of his big claw, so eventually he became a house owl. Can you imagine a house owl? He was always very well mannered in our house, and he caused no trouble, except on one particular occasion. One midsummer day, we had a visit from a new minister of our church. He had just arrived in Saskatoon, so he didn't know about our owls. Mother took him into the living room, and he sat down on our sofa with a cup of tea balanced on his knee and began to talk to Mother about me skipping Sunday school. Will had been off on an expedition down on the river bank. When we got home, he ambled across the lawn, jumped up to the edge of one of the living room windows, and peered in. Spotting the stranger, he gave another leap and landed heavily on the minister's shoulder. Mother had seen him coming and had tried to warn the minister, but she was too late. By the time she had her mouth open, Will was already hunched down on the man's shoulder, peering around into his face, making friendly owl noises. "Hoo, hoo," he asked politely. Instead of answering, the minister let out a startled yelp and sprang to his feet. The tea spilled all over the rug, and his teacup shot into the fireplace and smashed into a million pieces. It was all so sudden that Will lost his balance, and when he lost his balance, his talons just naturally tightened up to help himself steady himself. When Will tightened his grip on the minister, he gave a wild yell and made a dash for the door. Will had never been treated this way before. He didn't like it. Just as the minister reached the front porch, Will spread his wings and took off. His wings were big and they were strong, too. One of them clipped the man with a bang on the side of his head, making him yell even louder. But by then, Will was airborne. He flew up to his favorite poplar tree, and he was in such a huff at the way he had been treated that he wouldn't come down again until after supper. Riding on people's shoulders was a favorite pastime with Wool. Usually he was so careful with his big claws that you couldn't even feel them. Sometimes when he was on your shoulder and feeling especially friendly, he would nibble on your ear. His beak was sharp enough to have taken the ear right off your head in a single bite, but he would just catch the bottom of your ear in his beak and very gently nibble a little. It didn't hurt at all, though it used to make some people nervous. One of my father's friends was a man who worked for the railroad, and he had very big red ears. Every time he came for a visit to our house, he wore a cap with ear flaps. He wore it even in summertime, because he said with ears as big as his and an ear-nibbling owl around, he just couldn't afford to take any chances. Will was usually good-natured, but he could get mad. One morning, Mother sent me to the store for some groceries. My bike had a flat tire, so I had to walk, and Wool walked with me. We were only a little way from our house when we met the postman coming towards us. He had a big bundle of letters in his hand, and he was sorting them and not watching where he was going. Instead of stepping around Wool, he stepped right into him. Worse still, he didn't even look to see what it was he had stumbled over. He just gave a kind of a kick to get whatever it was out of his way. Well, you can do a lot of things to Wool and get away with it, but kicking him was something different. Hissing like a giant tea kettle, he spread his wings wide out and clomped the postman in the shins with them. A whack from one of his wings was like a kick of a mule. Owls' wings are very strong. The postman dropped his handful of letters and went pelting down the street, yelling, "Blue murder," with Wool right on his heels. After I got hold of Wool and calmed him down, I apologized to the postman. But for a month after that, he wouldn't come into our yard at all. He used to stand at the gate and whistle until one of us came out to get the mail. Our owls were so used to going nearly everywhere with me that when school started that fall, I had a hard time keeping them at home. I used to bicycle to school, which is about 2 miles away across the river. During the first week after school opened, I was late 4 times because of having to take the owls back home after they followed me part way. Finally, Dad suggested that I lock them up in a big pen each morning just before I left. Wool and Weeps hadn't used that pen for a long time, and when I put them in, they acted as if they were in jail. Wool was particularly furious, and he began to tear at the chicken wire with his beak and claws. I sneaked off fast. I was almost late anyway, and I knew if I was late once more, I'd be kept in after school. I was about halfway over the bridge when a man on a footpath gave a shout and pointed to something behind my back. At the same time, a car coming toward me jammed on its brakes and nearly skidded onto the cement railings. Not knowing what was going on, I put on my brakes too. And I just had time to stop when there was a wild rush of air on the back of my neck and a deep whoo-hoo in my ear. And Wool landed on my shoulder. He was out of breath, but he was so pleased with himself that I didn't have the heart to take him home. Anyways, there wasn't time, so he rode the handlebars the rest of the way to school. I skidded into the yard just as the 2-minute bell was ringing, and all the other kids were going through the doors. I couldn't decide what on earth to do with Wool. Then I remembered that I had some twine in my pocket. Twine is like string. I fished it out and tried to tie him by one leg to the handlebars. The first class I had that morning was French. Ooh, my favorite. Well, between worrying about Wool and not having done my homework, I was soon in trouble with the teacher, whom we called Fifi behind her back. Fifi made me come up in front of the class so she could tell me how dumb I was. Can you imagine a teacher doing that? I don't think I like this teacher. I was standing beside her desk, wishing the floor would open up and just swallow me up, when there was a whomp, whomp, whomp at the window. I turned my head to look, and there sat Wool. It hadn't taken him long to untie the twine. I heard later that he banged on the windows of 2 or 3 other classrooms before he found the right one. Having found the right room at last, he didn't waste any time. Unluckily, Fifi had left one of the windows open. Wool ducked down, saw me, and flew right in. He was probably aiming to land on my shoulder, but he missed, and at that last second tried to land on Fifi's desk. It was a polished hardwood desk. He couldn't get a grip on it. His brakes just wouldn't hold. He skated right across the desk, scattering papers and books all over the floor. Fifi saw him coming and tried to get up out of her chair, but she wasn't fast enough. Wool skidded off the end of the desk and plumped right into her lap. There were some ructions after that. I think that just means lots of things happening. I was sent to the principal's office, and Fifi went home for the rest of the day. The principal was a good fellow, though. He just read me a lecture and warned me that if I didn't keep my owl away from school in the future, he would have to get the police to do something about it. We finally figured out a way to keep the owls from following me to school. Each morning, just before I left, we would let Wool and Weeps into the kitchen. Mother would feed them the bacon rinds left over from breakfast, Well, I sneaked out the front door and rode away. It worked fine, but it was a little hard on Mother because the owls got so fond of the kitchen she usually couldn't get them out of it again. Once I heard her telling a friend until a woman had tried to bake a cake with two horned owls looking over her shoulder, they hadn't really lived at all. Can you imagine if you had a pet that followed you to school and banged on our classroom window and jumped onto my desk? I wonder how that would go. You know, if I make a text-to-text connection, it kind of reminds me of our Christmas story about the Herdmans, when Leroy Herdman let his cat come to school and all of the commotion that caused. Can you make a text-to-text connection? Do you have a pet? What would happen if your pet followed you to school and you didn't even know? That is the end of chapter 9.